Gary, my friend, I should say Dr. Gary. Dr. Gary Sanchez is here with us today. Really good to have you.
Well, thank you. And, that's a great question right off the bat. I was a dentist for 32 years, but I haven't practiced for the last 3. So am I still Dr. Sanchez or am I just now Gary?
I
I
believe
don't
that
have an
once you're
answer.
a doctor, you're always a doctor. That's my theory anyway, right? But
I'm sticking to it.
anyway, because I think doctors should be called doctors because the amount of discipline required to become a doctor is pretty crazy, right? Like
Yeah.
the barrier of entry. I always tease people in real estate a little bit because that's my space, obviously. And I always say one of the challenges with real estate is the barrier of entry is so low that not a lot of people commit, right? I say it's not like somebody says, yeah, I'm gonna give it a try to be a doctor. you know, where people saying really, hey, I'm gonna give it a try. Well, the barrier of entry is so high that nobody's trying to be a doctor. You're going to be a doctor, right? You're gonna pay the price. So anyway, great to have you here. I love what you're doing now. We're gonna get to that because I'll tell you right now, our audience can take advantage of what it is you're doing, sort of the WHYos, the Y operating system, and you've developed something called the Y Institute. So before we sort of go back a little bit and maybe your journey to where you are now, could you maybe tell the listeners a little bit about the Y Institute and what it's all about and what it is you guys do?
Yeah. So like I mentioned before, I was a dentist. I graduated from USC Dental School in 1988. And the advice that I was given at the time from the experts was build a great product and people will come, right? Go out and do the best job you can. People will naturally and mysteriously find out about you and you'll have this amazing practice. So I spent 20 years reaching the highest levels you could go to in dentistry, working with the best mentors, going to the best institutes, building a beautiful practice, buying all the technology, training a really great team, only to find out that I still blended in with everybody else who said, yeah, I'm a dentist too. And man, that drove me crazy. And I had never worked so hard at something and not gotten the results that I thought I would. My practice wasn't growing like I thought it would. And that's when I heard about that concept of why, right? I saw Simon Sinek's TED Talk back in 2009.
All right.
And I watched, you've probably seen it, right?
Yep.
Yep. Only about 62 million people have seen it. And so I watched it many, many times and read his book multiple times. And I said, that's what I'm missing. I have a great what, but I don't know my why. And so I became obsessed with that. And I called Simon. I said, Simon, can you help me discover my why? So he and I spent about 8 months going back through my life, looking for clues, trying to figure out my why. And when I finally figured it out, that my why is to find a better way and then share it, to find a better way and share it, then my life started to make so much sense to me. I have a lot of patents and products and inventions that are all better ways of doing things. So I took what I learned from discovering my why, and we stopped talking about what we do, crowns, bridges, fillings, complete gum care, all that stuff. And we started talking about why we do, what we believe, right? We believe that life is better when you have great teeth. And you can't have a great life if you have bad teeth. And so as we started changing all of our the direction of our marketing and messaging, the right people started coming to us. And my practice went from just getting by to having abundance of the right people. And so as my practice took off, I started getting calls from other dentists that said, hey, can you help me do what you did? So I went back and figured out what Simon was trying to do, and I made it better. So instead of taking 6 or 8 or 10 months, I could sit down with you, Richard, in about an hour and help you discover your why. And I did this for thousands of people for free all over the world on stages, on Skype, my patients. So remember, I'm a dentist. So while you're getting numb, you're going to get your why discovered. So I did this so many times that I started to notice patterns and trends and similarities. And I figured out that there's only 9 different whys. That was the most important thing I figured out. Because once I saw that, then I was able to help people discover their why in about 15 minutes. Then I was able to teach other people how to do this. Then I was able to gather more and more data. And with that data, I developed a software where in 2016, I launched the Why Discovery that could find your why in about 15 minutes. And then in 2021, we launched the WHYos Discovery, the Why operating system that finds your why, your how, and your what, and builds your message for you in about 8 minutes. And so here's the important thing, Richard, is I've done more why discoveries than anybody in the world. And I was only about 70% accurate. So if everything you do, your passion, your purpose, your direction, your messaging, your marketing, your branding is all based on your why, do you think it would be valuable to make sure that your why is correct?
Yeah.
And so that's where the software took out the human element and actually got down to the essence of what actually is your why. And we could dive into that too, how that was all developed, if you want, because it's kind of an interesting journey. But the point is, discovering your why used to be this elusive, challenging thing that most people never figured out. So let's say 61 million people saw Simon Sinek's TED Talk. How many do you think actually discovered their why?
Yeah, not many.
Not many, right?
Yeah.
Everywhere I go, I hear people say, yeah, I know what you're talking about, but man, I haven't been able to figure out my own why.
Yeah.
And so what good is that concept? How useful is that concept if you don't know your why or
I
your
think
how
it's
or your
I think it's brilliant. So just to back up a little bit, Simon Sinek's book, just for the listeners, was Start with Why.
start with why?
That's the
Yes.
book you're talking about, right? And
Yes.
I've read it. I think I might have read it twice. I don't know, but anyway, it was. I still remember the TED Talk. He's up there with the circles. Remember the circles? He's doing the circles, and it was absolutely brilliant. And it really, really intrigued me. And I had read a lot of books, and they're all sort of related, right? And I've always been really intrigued about, what is my why? What is somebody else's why in the organization? And you're 100% right. It's always been one of those things, but it's been very hard to figure out. And I remember somebody said one time, I can't remember where I heard this, but they said the consumer, they don't really care what you do as much as, they care about why do you do it?
Yes.
What is that passion behind what it is you do that is bigger than just straightening somebody's teeth or bigger than just giving somebody a filling, right?
Yes.
So you can see how powerful that is because people buy into somebody's passion as to why they want to do something, right? And it becomes such a brilliant marketing play if you can figure it out really, really clearly, right? And I think that's what you've done. When I did mine, my why was challenge. I got it written down. My how was simplify, and my what was trust. So, what you've done, and I'm really interested to hear how you created this. But maybe what we'll do is we'll sort of go forward and go back a little bit. So, for the listeners, you got your why, you discover your why, you discover your how, and you discover your what, right? And obviously, I would suggest, and correct me if I'm wrong, that your why is sort of your driving force, right? That's sort of what leads you. And you said there's basically 9 whys. You've discovered there's only 9 whys. How many hows and whats? Is there 9 of each one of them?
No. So here's the thing. There are 9 different whys.
Yeah.
Everybody has all 9. One of them is more dominant than the rest. And that's the one that becomes your why.
Okay.
But the second most dominant is your how.
Right.
And the third most dominant is your what.
Right.
Took me a long time to figure that out. And it's holds true every time. And so in your case, your why is to challenge the status quo and think differently. So what that means for all the listeners, and if you've listened for quite a while, you know that Richard doesn't have a structure. He doesn't follow the rules. He does it his own way. Wherever we end up is where we end up, right? And so you think big. You think outside the box. You don't want to be put in the box of this is how you have to do that, right?
Right.
Now, how you go about doing that is simplifying things down to just what's necessary. Let's get rid of all the other stuff and let's focus on the couple things that are going to make the biggest difference. But ultimately, what you bring is a trusting relationship where people can count on you, where you're there for them. Will you reach your hand out and say, let me take you to where we need to go? I'll be that guide for you. And so if we were to narrow this down to just a couple for everybody, it's called your simple WHYos. So when you discover your WHYos, you also get your simple WHYos. So this is Richard's. Richard believes that success happens when he challenges the status quo and thinks outside the box. How he does that is by making things simple and easy to understand. And ultimately what he brings is a trusting relationship where others can count on him. And how does that feel to you, Richard?
No, it like when I finished the, WHYos, I went, wow, because, I think first of all, I'm an entrepreneur, been an entrepreneur since I was 24 years old. Okay. So it's all I've really ever done. I've never wanted to work for anybody else. I always want to figure out things on my own. And I totally agree. I look at the status quo in the world and I think to myself, like, it confuses me sometimes. I goes, why is that the way we're doing something? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And then I have trouble with complication. Like it's so funny. Like I'm surrounded by people that can handle complexity because I can't handle complexity. I get all wound up and I get anxiety and I get frustrated, right? So I'm a great starter, if you will, not necessarily a great finisher, because a complication, it's easy to start something. But then, so in my world, I've had to consciously surround myself with people that can handle a little more complexity than I can, right? I'm so simple, right? The way I plan a day is incredibly simple. And then when I was a member of the strategic coach for quite a while, and Dan Sullivan said something to me that I always remember. It stood out, and I have it written down. I have something called Living Legacy. That's something I sort of read on a regular basis, just my guiding principles, operational practice, that sort of thing. And in there, I have handshake relationships. And that was from Dan Sullivan, because I remember when he said that, he's so right. Like anytime that I'm getting in a relationship with somebody and I think about some massive contract and everybody calls an agreement, but I'm not convinced it's agreement. I think it's a disagreement. The only reason we need that piece of paper is when we disagree, right? And I've always thought, well, I don't want to be that complicated, right? I'm not a litigious person. I'm not into all that. I'd rather just, what can we do to solve this relationship? Let's move on, right? Like that sort of thing. So when I went through it all and when I read sort of the characteristics of the challenge of simplifying the trust, it so much described me and almost in some ways helped me become more comfortable with who I am. Does that make sense?
For sure.
It gives you permission, right?
Yep.
Yeah. All of a sudden you feel like you have permission to say, okay, this is me. I'm good with that, right? I don't have to be everything else. And I just thought it was absolutely brilliant, because I think one of the great challenges for a lot of human beings is, we get pulled so many different directions, right? And we get caught up in things that are not in our wheelhouse. And I've always said it's going to be really hard to succeed at a high level, if you're spending a lot of time in the areas that you're not talented at, right? And probably not passionate as well. And that's why I think the more self-discovery we can have as a human being, the more value we can bring to the world, right? In our own space.
You hit the nail on the head. And the kind of the way we talk about it is when what you do is in line with your WHYos,
right?
Your why, how, and what, you will love what you do.
Yeah.
You will have passion for what you do. You will have unlimited energy for what you do. And passion is the fuel that gives you the energy to pursue your dreams, right? Without passion, you'll give up.
Yes.
With passion, you'll stick to it. So you're such a perfect example of this, because it's funny what you said is, I've never wanted to work for somebody else. You probably couldn't. You're not somebody that wants to show up 9 to 5 and be told what to do, right?
Yeah.
You'll make a terrible employee, but you'll make a great visionary.
Right.
You're not the one that's going to follow all the rules and get into the minutia, but you're going to see the big picture, and you're going to push the limits, and you're going to get people to think outside the box and bigger than they ever thought they could.
Yeah.
And you're going to be there for them to help them do that. And I'm sure that's what you do in your organization.
I hope so. So let's do a second one here. And then I want to go back and talk about the creation of this, because that's where I'm really intrigued. Like, how the hell did you create this, right? So if I look at my wife's as an example, because she's done this as well, and hers is her why is a better way.
Yep.
Her how is simplicity, and her what is contribute or contribution.
Yep.
So how would you, just quickly describing her to give the listeners some idea as to a second one? Because you nailed it. Like when she did this test, I read it and I go, there's my wife, right? So again, if you would just sort of describe those for the listeners.
Yeah. So for those of you that are listening, if you have a pen, or pencil, write this down. Better way, simplify, contribute. That's Sue.
Right.
So she's always in search of a better way, right? She can't turn it off.
Mhm.
She always wants to find things that are better. She's rarely satisfied. She's always trying to find out what's the best way to do this. Now, how she does that, just like you do, Richard, is she simplifies things.
Mhm.
She wants it simple, to the point. Don't give me the fluff. Don't beat around the bush. Just hit me with it. But ultimately, what she brings is a way to contribute, add value, have an
Mhm.
impact in other people's lives.
Right.
So what's fascinating about you two, and I don't know why this is, I have not figured this out yet, but it's fascinating how many people with the why of challenge, like you have,
Right.
marry somebody with the why of better way.
Huh.
My why is better way. My wife's why is challenge.
Right.
It's bizarre. It happens over and over and over. So here's the difference though between challenge and better way, because there's a little bit of a distinction. So people with the why of challenge want things different for the sake of them being different. Well, who
Right.
says we have to do it that way? Let's just take a different road home. Where people with a why of better way want it different if it's better, and only if it's better. Does
Right.
that make sense?
Makes total sense because she challenges me about that all the time. So in other words, I'll come up with some crazy idea, right? Okay, guess what we got to do, hon? Hey, I got this great idea. I read a book. I listened to a podcast or whatever. I said, we need to do this. And, she doesn't say much for a while and she'll listen and might not even saying right away. And then later she go, Rich, there's no reason we have to do that. Like it was just, she goes, she calls it an opportunity trap. She goes, you're going to get caught in another opportunity trap. It's not going to lead us anywhere good, right? It's just going to maybe make us busier or whatever the case is, right? And I just laugh because I always say that, she's my common sense, right? She's the one because, I get all these ideas. Let's do this, let's do that, let's do this, let's do that. And she is sort of my common sense. And then when I contribute, obviously, was her what? I always say about my wife, I say she was built to serve. My wife was built to serve. She is, when she's serving somebody, doing something for somebody, me, of course, like, sometimes to a fault, I think. And that's probably, we all have our faults, obviously, right? But yeah, she'll wear herself out to make sure she's, making some form of contribution to other people.
So let's talk about that for a minute. And this is for all of you that are listening. This statement is you've heard before, but it's very valuable when looking at your WHYos. And that is, a little bit of chocolate is good. Too much chocolate, not so good.
Right.
A little bit of challenge, in your case, the right amount of challenge, good. Too much challenge, not so good.
Right.
So challenging enough to move things forward, great. Challenging every single thing I say, which you probably could do,
Yeah.
not so good.
Right.
Right? So you got to figure out the right amount of each to get you where you want to go. And we call those bumpers.
Okay.
Right? So how wide do the bumpers need to be for you to play? So you actually have the widest. You need the widest bumpers to be able to play in for you to function. Like if I take your world and I condense it all the way down to like nothing, where you have to do just this, how's that going to work for you?
Right. Yeah.
Not.
Yeah.
But if I give you free reign to like play in a biggest area possible, hey, this is wonderful. Love it.
Yeah.
Your wife's a little narrower.
Yeah.
And so, and where this really can help play out in the real estate world is, would we present a home to you the same way we would present it to Sue?
Right. No, you wouldn't.
No. You want to know, hey, this is how we're going to have a big party here. How are we going to have fun with this? How are we going to make this exciting? What are we going to do to liven it up? And she's like, no. I want to know how this is better than what we currently have. Because as if this isn't better than what we currently have, I don't want it.
Right.
I don't even want to hear about it. So show me how this is better. And you're like, show me how this is different.
Yeah.
Show me how this is going to create something new.
So
Right? So you need to know this of your prospects,
mm-hmm.
so that you know how to present a home to them, especially if you know who the decision maker is, so that they feel like they've been heard. Because if all we talk about is fun and exciting and different, Sue's going to turn it off and go, they don't even understand what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
They don't get me.
Yeah.
I'm not buying that thing.
No, I love it. And
To
see,
me,
this type of stuff is like so intrigues me, right? So let's do this because I definitely want to get to the point where we can talk about how an individual can utilize this for themselves, okay, and how they can access it, obviously. But I also want to talk about some of the best practices and how you could utilize this for your customers.
Yeah.
Before we get into that, I need to understand your story. How the hell did you create this? Because I was thinking before I was getting ready for this podcast, I'm thinking, and I was on your website again. I'm having another look around, just trying to get a little familiar. And I thought to myself, like, if I was to start this, I wouldn't even know the first step. Like, I wouldn't know. How do you create, basically a software, right? That obviously by Sue and I both doing it, I feel it's very, very accurate, like incredibly accurate. How did this all take place? How long did it take you to do this?
Long time. And I never set out to do this, and I never wanted to do this. And this isn't what I pictured ever. Like 10 years ago, me being here talking to you about this, not a chance, because as you remember, my practice was taking off, and I had, I was only working 3 days a week. I had 4-day weekends every week, making a lot of money. It was just, doing great. So the thought of walking away from that was not in my mind at all. But what happened was I became obsessed with helping people discover their why. And as I did that more and more and more, because they would get that aha moment like you have and like Sue has, and that's addicting to help people get that. And so I kept doing it over and over and over. And finally, I was in Florida at a big law firm event, and I was supposed to speak for 45 minutes and bring somebody out of the audience and discover their why in front of everyone. 14 hours later, I'm still on stage, bringing people out of the audience, one after the other, and helping these lawyers develop their messaging. And then we'd have a video thing set up out in the hall, and they were recording their messages and all this. Anyways, halfway through the day, this one lawyer says to me, "Hey, Gary, how many whys are there?" And I thought, I don't know. I never even thought of that.
Yeah.
And so I started keeping track of it. And as I kept track of all these whys, I started to notice the same 9 come up over and over. And so here's how I used to do it, because your why is part of the limbic brain, the inner part of your brain. And that's the part of the brain that doesn't have the capacity for language. You can't understand why you feel some way. You just feel that way. Like, why do you love your wife? Well, I don't know. I just do.
Yeah.
Right. So the only way I could access the limbic brain was through stories. So I would have you tell me story after story after story. Here's the question I would ask you. So, Richard, tell me a story about an interaction you had with somebody at work that made you feel successful. And then you would tell me this story. And then I would say, and then Richard, tell me a story about an interaction you had with somebody outside of work that made you feel successful. And I would see the pattern in the stories, and that's what your why was, what made you feel successful. And I could do this over, and sometimes it would take a third story or a fourth story, but I did this so many times that I started to see all these patterns. And as I kept track, and as I figured out there were 9 whys, now I had an endpoint. And then I could get people to their why even faster. And I started to get more and more data. And so think about this. And for your audience, imagine that you are painting this incredible painting up on the wall. And you've gotten emotionally involved with it, physically involved with it, mentally involved with it. And you create this masterpiece. It takes you months and months and months to create this incredible masterpiece up on the wall. Once it's there, there's a lot of different ways now to get to that same exact painting. You could do paint by numbers, take a picture, break it down, create the outline. There's a lot of other ways now to get to that painting. So once I figured out there were 9 different whys, I figured out another way to get to them where I didn't have to hear all the stories because I knew what people with each of the whys would say. You would say, I helped them think different. I helped them get outside their box. I helped them see something they'd never seen before. I helped them push the limits. I helped them have more fun. I know what you will say if you have the why of challenge. So then I was able to develop I mind mapped the whole process. And then I was able to develop the algorithm, which I didn't know anything about, and I programmed the software. So here's the part that you're going to crack up. I think my next book is going to be called The Power of Pissed Off.
That'll sell, by the way. Even if the book's no good, the title will sell that book.
Because think of how much you and your listeners have been able to do in your life when you're pissed off about something.
Yeah.
Right. And so I had hired this tech firm to help me create this, and they kept messing with me. Oh yeah, we got to change this, another 5,000, another 5,000, 2,000, 5,000. I got so pissed off this one weekend. I said, if that freaking idiot can figure this out, I can figure it out. So I developed the algorithm, learned the software, and programmed the software in one weekend.
Wow.
And that's the same thing that we use today.
That's incredible.
It's a power of pissed off.
Right.
And so since then I've I built it on somebody else's platform. Now I got my own platform, but then I added the how and the what. And, once you've created the first step, then you can constantly see how to make it better and better and better. Right. And that's what happened. And so now there's a lot more to it than just your why, how, and what. It actually goes 9 levels deep. And there's a lot more depth that we could go into that I'd be happy to share at another time, but there's a lot to it.
Yeah.
And now we have, coaches around the world that are trained in this and can utilize it as well. But it's been a fascinating journey, never one I wanted to go on. But another thing that happened, Richard, is a few years ago, about 3.5, 4 years ago, I was at an event where maybe we had a little bit too much to eat and drink. And the next morning I woke up with a headache.
Yeah.
Took a couple Advil. Went back to bed. One of the Advil didn't dissolve, and it lodged in my GI tract and burnt a hole right where there was an artery, and I started bleeding internally and didn't know it. Ended up in the ER. My blood pressure was 60/30. Had to wait for so long that I almost died. And anyways, I ended up in the ICU for 9 days. A lot of crazy stuff happened. Pretty crazy story. And when I finally, obviously I made it through it, but when I got back to my practice, one of my patients that was in his mid 80s took me aside and he said, hey, Gary, you got another chance on life. And he said, when you get to be my age and you look back on your life, are you going to be glad that you stayed a dentist, or are you going to wish that you'd taken this why thing to the world? He said, I'm going to wish that I'd taken this why thing to the world. He said, well, then you know what you need to do. Mm-hmm. And that's when I sold my practice and said, got to follow my passion. You got to share a better way with the world. And so
I would say that anybody that has discovered their why through WHYos is thankful you went that way. Because, it's amazing. And tell everybody your goal. How many people do you want to discover their why? I love this.
So my vision is to be the first step in self-awareness. So there's a lot of great assessments out there. Myers-Briggs, Kolbe, StrengthsFinder, DISC. There's a lot of great ones, and we use them and we like them. Those are how you take action,
right?
Not why you take action. I have the world's only why discovery tool, but my goal is to impact 1 billion people in the next 15 years. Yeah. And we're on track for that now. And the more people that want to be part of this, there's a lot of people stepping forward that really want to help do this. Because imagine, Richard, if 1 billion people are clear on who they are, know how to articulate it, and know how to find their passion, what could we do? What could we accomplish? How much fun would that be? And that's really where we're headed.
Well, I think it's wonderful because the way I look at it, and I'm so glad there's a guy by the name of Joel Weldon that connected us.
Yes.
And it was so cool that And Joe's, I think he's in over 3,000 speaking engagements in his life. And what's Joe now? 82, I think he is.
Yeah.
And every year he water skis the amount of passes his age. And now he's up to 82 passes. It take him a few hours. It's incredible, right? Like, hasn't had sugar in what, 25 years or something like that. The only liquid that goes down his throat is water. And, he's a really interesting dude. And I remember when he connected us, and then I went and had a look at everything. I thought to myself, we all have heard about this whole concept of why for many, many, many years, right? And it probably started, I'm assuming, with Simon Sinek, but we can even go back to, I'm just trying to think, the Holocaust survivor that wrote the great. Pardon?
Nietzsche?
No, it was he wrote the great book. I can't remember, but in his book, he said that the why is more important than the how, right? Because the why actually brings meaning to what you're doing. The how brings the solution to what you're doing. And it's the meaning that becomes a driving force behind any human being. You look at parenting, you've got incredible amount of meaning in parenting, right?
Yes.
So when people can find the meaning behind what it is they're doing, that will allow them to be more motivated, right? And excited about, doing the how and the what sort of thing. And so when I heard that, when I read his book, A Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, that's who it was. Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. And what he talked about, back, in the Holocaust was the people that survived had a very strong why. He was saying that you could take two people and, he was a psychologist. So you could take two people and he would say, you could tell one had given up, completely given up. They'd be dead within 24, 48 hours, right? And he said, you take somebody else and they believed from the deepest part of their being, and this was their why, that someday they were going to get out and they're going to be reunited with their family. And that's what kept them alive, right? It was the meaning, because that was so important to them, that it actually is life-giving when your why is that strong. So when Joel connected us, I did my research, and then of course I did the test. I thought to myself, I said, this is really cool stuff, because I think it's such a great advantage for us all, right, to be able to discover what our why is. Now, so the test takes, what, 5 minutes? I think it took me about 5 minutes. Am I right saying that?
8 minutes. Yeah. 5 to 8 minutes.
Yeah, 5 to 8 minutes. Imagine all of the listeners in 5 to 8 minutes, you can all discover your why, your how, and your what. And it's a minimal investment. I don't know. What do you charge for this? Just so the listeners.
$97.
$97. So for $97, somebody can go on and in under 10 minutes, they can discover their why, their how, and their what, and it become a real guiding force in their life. And that's why I think this is so cool, because I don't believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that anybody has ever done this where they could discover that quickly, right? And you're right. We all know personality profiling and all that sort of thing, but this to me is sort of at the top. This should be the first thing you do before you really get involved in anything else. So let's talk about this. So let's say now that I've discovered my why, or one of the listeners has discovered their why, and we'll tell them at the end where they can go to get it done. But let's say they've discovered their why. So what would your recommendation be on how do they use this? How do they continue to move forward with it without sort of getting lost? Because it's easy, as we move through life, is we forget, we get so caught up in the hustle, the deal, this, and next thing you know, we're off track. So do you have any suggestions on how they would use this and how they would continue to use this so they don't actually get off track?
Yeah. Now, is this anybody, or is this in the real estate space?
Well, let's take the real estate space to a large degree, because that's who not all of our listeners, but many of our listeners are. So let's just pick entrepreneurs.
So entrepreneurs. So once you know your WHYos, what that helps you understand is, first, it helps you answer the question, who am I?
Right.
And why should I choose you? Why should somebody choose you? It gives you the words to clearly articulate what makes you special. Mm-hmm. Why should I choose you over everybody else who does what you do? And as unique as we all think we are, there's somebody else who does what you do. So I was a dentist, 600 dentists here in Albuquerque. How do I stand out from everybody else who does what I do? So here's a really important thing to know. If you talk about what you do, mm-hmm. you blend in with everyone who does what you do. Hey, I'm a realtor. what do you think comes to everybody's mind? Yeah, I know 10 of them.
All right.
But when you talk about why you do what you do, you stand out from everyone who does what you do. So once you know your WHYos, then you start utilizing that in your own personal messaging, in
Right.
your own personal branding. And here's the important part to know about that. Start by telling people what you believe. If all you get out of this today is knowing that you should start with what you believe versus what you do, I believe that if people think outside their box, they can do amazing things. They can push the limit. They can create a life they've always dreamed of if they can just get outside that box. And that's what you believe. I believe if they find a better way, they can move forward even faster and create that same life. So it all gets back to what you believe. So it becomes the essence of your personal message. But then you can take it and look at what you're currently doing and see if what you're doing is in line with your WHYos. And if it is, awesome. You are on the right path. If it isn't, you can still do it, but you'll probably run out of energy.
Right.
You want to make sure that you pick something, or if you're helping your kids, or if you're helping your team, make sure they're in the right position. You can help them figure that out very easily when you know their WHYos. But your WHYos, your why, how, and what is your decision making process. So for you, Richard, if I had an idea that I was going to present to you, I better show you how it's different. I better show you how it's simple. And I better show you how it's going to create better relationships, more trust. Right?
Yeah.
Because if I don't, you're not interested.
Right.
If I do, you are.
Right.
Here's what the WHYos, if I were to say in one sentence, what does the WHYos do for you? It helps you create better connections faster. Better connections with yourself first, better connections with the significant people in your family second, better connections with your marketplace in real estate, better connections with your prospects and your clients. And it does it really, really fast. So that it gets rid of all. See, what typically happens is when you meet somebody for the first time, say you meet them on Zoom or in person, you create a narrative around what you think you see, right? So you look at their hairstyle, you look at if they have jewelry or facial hair, you look at the way they're dressed, you might look at what's in the background, and you'll create a narrative around what you think you see. And that's who they become. And then you treat them that way. But the odds are it's not accurate. When you know their WHYos, it strips away all the stuff that you see and it brings forward what is there. So you know how to connect with them, what's important to them, how they think. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense, because where this should be used, the way I see it, and by the way, we're going to have our whole team do it this month in January. I'm recording this because I look at this as an opportunity. We always want to get the best out of our people, but the only way to get the best out of your people is to help your people, operate in their why, how, and what. Because otherwise they're struggling no different than you would struggle if you're not operating in your why, how, and what. So it's great to build teams, I would suggest, but it's also beneficial to understand your customers as well, right? So that now you have a much better idea. Now, let's just look at that for a minute. So let's say, because I'm just thinking about real estate, and I'm thinking, would it be appropriate for me as a real estate sales professional to say to my customer, I need you to do this, this little exercise? Like, I don't know. Do you think?
Let me give you a possible way to present that.
Right.
One of the benefits in working with us at Simply Realtor, whatever the name is that we use what's called the platinum rule. Now, everybody's heard of the golden rule. Golden rule is treat others the way that you want to be treated, right? But what if you don't want to be treated the same way that I want to be treated? And that's where the platinum rule comes in, which is treat others the way they want to be treated. And how we do that is by utilizing this tool called the WHYos Discovery. Takes about 8 minutes. And once you've discovered your WHYos, you and I can have an amazing conversation. I'll know exactly how to help you in a way that you want to be helped.
Mhm.
So that I'll show you the right homes. I'll present them in the way that I know you want them presented to you. And our connection and our relationship will be that much stronger because we'll understand each other at a deeper level.
Mhm.
Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. And not only that, I do think that a consumer, I'm just trying to play this out in my mind,
Yeah.
right? I do think that a consumer would actually appreciate that.
Yep.
Like I know there's some that are going, oh, 8 minutes, and hey, it is what it is, right? But I think, especially when you're dealing with somebody's most valuable asset, because the home is somebody's most valuable asset, whether you're selling one or whether you're buying one, right? And I don't even like to use them as numbers, like how many sales you're going to do. My theory is I want to know how many families you're going to help this year, right? Like it's just a much better positioning because now you said, I want to go out and help families. And I think if you want to do a really good job to help families, I think it's very beneficial. You understand the people you're working with. And I think if you presented it that way, I think most people would be open to that.
Especially if you use if it's a husband and wife or a
Yeah.
couple,
Yeah.
because the analogy would be, along the lines of, and you may want things presented a little bit differently than your significant other.
Right.
And we'll make sure that we do that so that you both feel heard and understood.
Yeah. I think it's brilliant. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to switch this up because we always like to have a little bit of fun with the podcast. Okay. So I've got a bunch of questions. They're called lightning round questions, and they're meaningless, and you don't win any prize. And then we're going to finish with what I call the big three. And there's 3 questions I'll give you, and you give us your smart answer. And that's what we're looking for. But anyway, okay. So lightning round. Favorite food?
Red chili.
Red chili. Now, I've never heard that one before, but that's great. Favorite movie?
Oh my gosh, favorite movie. I mean, the only one that comes to mind is Rocky right now off the top of my head. Probably Rocky.
Yeah. Okay. What book should everyone read?
Think and Grow Rich.
Yeah. Favorite hobby?
Currently pickleball.
Pickleball. Everybody's into pickleball these days. Like it is huge. Like I go over where I live here in Florida. It's a little community and we got a little clubhouse, right? You go over there and there's a gym and pools and whatever, right? All kinds of stuff. And all the tennis courts have been turned into pickleball courts. And I go over there now and all I hear is a bang, bang, bang. It's very loud, but I got to go try it because everybody says it's amazing. Favorite music or musician?
Daft Punk.
I don't even know who they are.
It's EDM. It's hard to even imagine that that's who I actually really like EDM because it makes gives me energy. So Daft Punk, you ought to check them out. My daughter came home from college with this Daft Punk album and I'm like, who the heck is that? And then I started listening to it and I was like, well, I know that song and I know that song. They're about our age.
Are they?
They were the ones that started EDM. And they were the ones that wear the helmets. You never saw their face. They never showed their face so they could live a normal life.
Huh?
They just broke up though about a year ago. But if you look up Daft Punk, you'll say, "Oh yeah, I know that song."
I gotta check them out.
Yeah.
Check them out. Favorite day of the week?
Got to be Friday.
Yeah. Why is that? Just because the weekend's in front of you?
Yeah, weekend's in front of you. There's always excitement around Friday afternoon and what you're going to do with the weekend and the plans that are coming up with the family and that kind of stuff. Maybe you're traveling somewhere.
Yeah.
It's probably got to be Friday.
Okay, good. What's a dream holiday you want to go on that you haven't done yet?
A dream holiday that I haven't done yet. Probably last summer, I went to Portugal for a month and it really got me more interested in traveling through Europe. And I would like to take my 2 daughters and my wife. We did it years ago, but I'd like to do it again and go to more places. So probably taking my daughters and wife through Spain.
Yeah, that'd be a great holiday.
Yeah.
Okay, so big 3 questions. Here's the first one. I call it the small giant. What actionable idea that is relatively easy to execute, that if done with consistency, would produce a great result in our listener's life?
Get a powerful morning routine.
Agreed. That's brilliant. Agreed. The second question, deliver the unexpected. I wrote a book many years ago called Deliver the Unexpected. And as a company, our teaching is that the unbelievable customer service is the greatest marketing program you could ever have, especially in the real estate space, right? Because most people get an agent through referral. So is there a great customer experience that you have had that you instantly became an advocate of that person or company? Or is there something you do to turn people into advocates?
That's a great question. I just saw this TED Talk on the customer service of this restaurant in New York. You probably have seen that one.
Oh, 11 Madison?
I think that might be. What was the name of the TED Talk? And my wife brought me the book for Christmas. Just she didn't even know I've seen that TED Talk.
Yeah, Unreasonable Hospitality is the book.
Unreasonable Hospitality. Yes. Yeah. So I can't say that I've experienced that, but anytime I find something that's better, that's good, I always have to share it. I wish I had one in the top of my head right now.
That's cool.
Oh, you know what? You know what? The best customer service I've ever experienced was at a golf course at Castle Pines.
Okay.
In Denver.
Yeah.
We pull up, they run out, grab all of our stuff, shine my shoes, changed all the spikes back in that day, cleaned all the clubs, took them out to the range. You sit down and order. There's no prices on anything. You can't pay for anything. Of course, my buddy had to, but as you're on the practice range, there's a guy putting the ball on the tee for you. They have a cart that follows you for your 18 holes with anything you could possibly want. It was just off the charts customer service. That's the best customer service I've ever had anywhere, is at Castle Pines golf course.
Isn't that amazing, eh? You know what's interesting about customer service is I always say that. So think about a golf course, because this is a really good example, because I'm a golfer, you're a golfer. But if you think about it, you've got grass, you've got bricks and mortar. You know, at the end of the day, right? You got some grass cut shorter than the other because it's a green or fairway or the rough and that sort of thing. So in other words, that's all the same. And you know what the difference is? The difference is people. It's people that make the difference, right? And, you know, when you go away for other people, it's amazing. They will talk about you, right, till the cows come home, right? If they just know that you're really trying to do a great job for them, right? And impress them. Like people love that, right? Like you mentioned Castle Pines, that thousands of people are going to hear now, which is pretty cool stuff. So based on what you know now, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
I would say discover your WHYos. Make sure that what you've chosen to do with your life is in line with what you believe.
Yeah. Because
you will have passion for what you do. And passion truly is the key. If you have passion, if you love what you're doing, I think I lived life by default in my 20s. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was more like path of least resistance.
Yeah.
My dad was a dentist. Was it ever what I really should have done? I don't know. Look what was able to be created because of it.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's really the direction. So if I could go back, I would have been more in line or in tune with my why. Yeah. So that if what you do is in line with your why, you have passion for what you do. That would be it. So if you're young right now listening to this, discover your WHYos, see if what you're doing is in line with it. If it is, wonderful. If it isn't, change it.
Yeah. You know, it's so funny. How old are you, Gary?
61.
So you're 61, I'm 62. So obviously we're the same vintage, roughly. And it was funny because when I grew up, when I was very young, my parents never ever talked about passion. Like
No.
they just talked about work your ass off, go get a job, right? You know, get an education, get a job, whatever the case is, and then work really hard, work harder than everybody else. You're going to be a success. And I think the evolution that we've had as humans is so cool, where we actually can talk about this now, right? And say that because I think it is so important. I really do. I think if you don't love what you do, you're never going to be a great success. You might make a living, but I'm not convinced you're going to be a great success. I've always said, think about professional athletes. Do you think there's, you know, the greatest players in the NFL, do you think they hate playing football?
No, I
No,
love it.
love playing football, right? Like they probably can't wait to get there. And I know there's probably some fringe players that maybe don't love it as much or whatever the case is, but you look at the great ones, you can't, like Tom Brady, you couldn't get him to retire, right? You know, he wants to do it for another year, right? And that's the way I think that we've got to think about life. And I think when you talk about WHYos, that's the advantage you offer people with this, right? They can discover that and get into their wheelhouse so that, you know, it's like they get up and they say, okay, boy, am I ever lucky to have another day at work today, right? Look what I get to do today. Yeah, which is really cool. So how do they, so just guide everybody if you would. So what is the best way for them to go check this out?
Yeah, just go to whyinstitute.com, WHYinstitute.com, and you'll see Discover Your WHYos. Will you see Discover Your Why or your WHYos? I would just do the WHYos because it'll give you everything. And it's
Yeah.
only $97. It's not expensive, but it is incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
So highly recommend doing that. And then you'll have it for yourself. You won't wonder anymore.
Yeah.
You'll know. You can't have much confidence if you wonder or you think or you're sort of or you're kind of or maybe it's this.
Yeah.
Just know. And
Now,
then
do you think people's WHYos changes?
I don't think their why does, because I bet you've always thought differently, just like I've always tried to find a better way since as far as I can remember. But their how and their what might.
Yeah.
I don't have enough data yet to be able to tell you for sure, but my gut tells me that their how and their what could change, but the why doesn't.
Right. Yeah, I would tend to think that's probably true.
Mhm.
So, final question. My tagline, it's a beautiful life, make it count. What's a beautiful life to you?
A beautiful life to me is one where we're continually finding better ways, continually pushing things forward, continually enjoying what we do.
Yeah, I love it. Well, listen, Gary, this has been, I should call you Doc. Hey, Doc, this has been a real pleasure, my friend. So I thank you for doing this. I know we're going to continue some discussions on how we can get you a little more involved in our organization and maybe help some of our members and that sort of thing, and also our coaches. So thanks, my friend, and all the best this year.
Yes, thank you, Richard, so much for having me here. And I enjoyed our conversation, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Okay.